firstly, I'd just like to say thanks for inviting me to speak this morning. And I think your report is very timely because there's a lot of organisations and a lot of employees asking questions around, will equality, diversity and inclusion and all the progress that's been made over the last couple of years, is that going to be impacted now while organisations are kind of, I suppose, dealing with the disruptions that you've mentioned there?
Yeah.
I was speaking on a panel there a little while ago. It was actually just a couple of days ago. It was a global aviation conference, and they had asked this question. And you can imagine from what the world is like for the aviation companies at the moment. And I was delighted to see that there really still is a commitment to good diversity and inclusion practice within the industry. But some of the key messages that I had shared there, and I think I'll share them here again today, Maureen. I think the first thing that I'm certainly seeing is that there is an expectation that our organisations are reflective of the customers and the communities we serve. And I think it's kind of accepted as the norm now. But what I'm starting to see is, the kind of priority and the attention that's being paid to annual reports, and in particular the non-financial reporting aspect of annual reports. There is this expectation now that companies are able to demonstrate that their organisations are reflective of the customer and the communities that they serve, and that they are putting a lot of work and effort in to creating workplaces and creating workplace cultures that support people in all aspects of their lives. So that's one point. I think the second thing I would say is I think we've moved beyond it being considered the ethical and the moral and the right thing to do. And there is reams of research, and the simple fact that we know is that good diversity and inclusion and good company culture, it's good for business. And I think what I'm starting to see as organisations work to rebuild and restructure the organisations, they're going to need diverse talent. They're going to need diverse thinking to be able to kind of bring the innovation and the creativity that's going to be required to get the business back on track. And I think we know lack of diversity, it stifles innovation, it promotes groupthink. So I really don't think organisations can afford to not be mindful of diversity and inclusion. One of the things we did share for the aviation companies is we had actually produced a piece of work within the Centre of Excellence around how can you be mindful of diversity and inclusion, particularly if you're downsizing in your organisation. And there were some practical things in there around like conducting exit interviews and, trying to collect as much information as you can as people are exiting the organisation around what can you do and what do you need to be mindful of as you rebuild.
Yeah. That's really interesting, and something potentially we wouldn't think of, the importance of collecting data on somebody leaving, even though we're going through this turmoil, the value that can add when hopefully for most of us will be rebuilding again. The bottom line, as you said, that the right thing to do is very much, it's still the smart thing to do. And I think we're going through so much change now, and our organisations are, the fact we're all in this work environment now, we've had to evolve very quickly. So that innovative thinking, I think, is going to be more critical than ever. So the key to that would be the diverse workforce, is what is the summary, I think, Sandra, is it for you?
It is, yeah. And I think I was reading a report there from Gallup. I think it was published a couple of years ago. And it talked about, organisations that have a good company culture, can see productivity gains of over 22%, profitability of over 25%. Yeah. And again, I was reading a McKinsey report recently, and it's the same. So that's what I mean. I think we've moved beyond, right? We've moved beyond the business case, but there's still evidence across the board that it is the right thing to do for your business, and in particular now as we try and rebuild and get through what's happening in the world right now.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. So if we move into the key findings of the report then, and firstly, if we look at the importance of ED&I when it comes to talent attraction, and these next couple of slides will overlap a bit because it's attraction, and then we'll look at retention. But according to the survey, that regardless of the journey that we've gone over the last 6 months, respondents still feel very strongly about the organisation's commitment to D&I. 71% say that organisations should have a voice on current diversity and inclusion issues. A similar number say that organisations' D&I policies are very or quite important when considering a new role, so that's key. And then 60% said that they will only consider applying to an organisation with a public commitment to ED&I. So, Sandra, what are your thoughts on those points, and why do you believe ED&I is so important to individuals, to people?
Yeah, and I think it's great to see your report is consistent with what we would see in particular over the last couple of years. So, for example, there was a report launched by Accenture I think it was International Women's Day this year, and that showed that over 67% of people will actively research the culture of an organisation before they consider a move. And you know, if you think about it, if you're somebody who's on the move or considering moving, and you don't find, you know, you're looking on a company website and you don't find any information around, you know, that pays attention to the culture of the organisation, or that kind of demonstrates that it is an inclusive organisation that embraces diversity, you probably would, you know, be thinking differently about whether you would apply for that job or not. And I think in particular when it comes to minorities and women, for example, it's really, really important. But I think even from some time back, I think what we've started to find is, you know, as the younger generations come into the workforce, so if we think about it, like millennials now are, you know, have been in the workforce for many years, and we have Gen Zs coming in. And I think if we think about the expectation around what work is like for them and how it fulfills them as individuals, for millennials, it really is around that work is around, you know, I describe it as learn, earn, return. Okay, and that's what people expect in their lives, that they have an opportunity to contribute. They feel connected to the mission of the organisation. They have an opportunity to be able to contribute to the society as well, and to, you know, to really feel like that they're given back and they're connected to the organisation. And if an organisation doesn't pay attention, doesn't create those opportunities, what happens with millennials is they come into the organisation and they leave. And certainly what I've seen is when they leave, they take people with them. So I've worked in organisations where we've had, you know, people working, say, for example, in the contact centre and things like that, and they move, and when they go, they take another 10 people with them. And really it's because, you know, the work is a social environment. And if the culture is not what it says on the tin, they move on.
Yeah, I found out very quickly. It's that saying is, you know, diversity has been invited to the party. I'm sure many of you have heard it, and inclusion has been asked to dance. But the extension of that, which is, I think, what you're speaking about, is that belonging piece, that culture piece, that ability to dance like nobody's watching, you know. And then, you know, I suppose we can ask ourselves, can we do that within our work environment? And it's interesting about, you know, and that is coming through around the younger generation. They do want that give back. They do want that broader than the learn piece. It has to be more than just the job satisfaction. Is broader than the skill base, I think, now. And then just, you know, it speaks about here a company should have a voice. And I think it probably links into your culture piece. So the voice, how does the company go about that? And I know there's no quick fixes, but would you have any recommendations or thoughts on that, the voice piece?
Well, I suppose if I can talk about something, I suppose we're doing in DCU, and over the last couple of years, we've actually been building a software tool. It's called Inclusio, and it is very much around that, around giving people a voice, and in particular underrepresented groups. And people who potentially don't have a voice in the culture, and like what I find is there's a disconnection because and again this was it's something that came out in that Accenture report that I mentioned, where they talked about this disconnect between what the senior leadership team think the culture of the organisation is like compared to what the individuals in the organisation feel that the culture is like. And I think the challenge for senior leaders is, you know, culture is easy to sense, but it's difficult to measure. Okay, that's how I would describe it. Yeah. So, and it's very difficult to then have that as one of your key priorities when you can't put any KPIs around it, or it's very difficult to kind of tangibly measure the impact of the interventions you're taking around culture. So one of the things we're doing, as I mentioned, we've built this, it's a software tool, and we are bringing KPIs to culture. And essentially how we're doing that is providing individuals with a way to confidentially have a voice and to be counted and to guide the organization in their efforts around creating a good culture in the workplace. Because that's the challenge that I see, you know, when you're at the top of the organization and the bigger your organization becomes, it's much harder to stay connected and get a real sense of what's going on the ground. And then sometimes, you know, people don't feel comfortable and confident in kind of, you know, or they don't want to be singled out when they're trying to give feedback. So that's what we've tried to solve really is, and to bring KPIs to something that is very difficult to measure.
Yeah, and that project is progressing.
It's there. Yeah, we're trialing with some global organisations at the moment. I'm happy to share, or please reach out and connect with me if anybody's interested in hearing more about it. Or I'm happy to bring it to your group, Maureen, if it's something you'd like to hear more about. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting because it is, as you said, quite large organisations, but you know, you can sense it, but that the measurement is difficult. And that would be really, really interesting if you can crack that one, Sandra, because it is critical to organisations and the retention, I think, of people and why people stay, that why piece.
Yeah.
Excellent. So now if we, I just want to move on to flexible working, and this is something we particularly looked at this year because of our world of work. I suppose, you know, flexible working had becoming or was becoming more common over the last decade. However, COVID-19 rapidly accelerated that, and like I'm sure many people on the call, we you know, coming from a very much office-based organisation, we all moved remotely almost literally overnight. So, you know, it has speeded up. Now, I suppose what I will say getting into this piece, as I said earlier, we did this research at the end of August, mid-September. So we were coming back to hybrid type situations. Now, in our current situation, again, we've been asked to continue to work back from home. So this is, but I think, you know, we will be back in the world of work again. Normality will come, but I think it's the hybrid work will be coming across. So I just want to look at, I suppose, what have people said about flexible working? And 83% said that flexible working is essential or important. And 25%, so 1 in 4 would look for another job if it wasn't an option. 30% of parents said flexible working is essential, and 74% of respondents say flexible working arrangements have a positive impact on the success of an organisation. And something maybe I'd like to explore, Sandra, with you afterwards or later on. But firstly, I want to take, I suppose from an ED&I perspective, it also came across in the research that flexible working enabled better ED&I, and particularly for underrepresented groups, they saw most positive. What are your thoughts on that, on those findings, in particular around flex working in relation to ED&I?
Yeah, I think, you know, I spent many years working in the UK, and I worked for BT Global Services at the time. And I think, you know, I remember when I was getting set up to work for the organisation, we had no office. And that was probably 12 years ago. So I remember when I came back to Ireland, and I just kind of felt some organisations seem to be really slow at the uptake around offering flexible working. And then I found that, you know, there's also a cultural aspect to it as well, that a lot of people in Ireland were saying, oh, I'd miss coming into work and I'd miss being in the office. So that was quite interesting. And what's happened now, obviously, we've been forced, whether we like it or not, as an organisation or as individuals, we've been forced into this. And today, I suppose, quite fitting, seeing as we're at the start of our level 5. But yeah, we've been forced now to kind of embrace flexible working. And I think it probably brings challenges for organisations at the same time as it does for individuals. Like, for example, I have somebody working on my team who has 3 small children at home. Her husband is working as well. And just the space, it's very difficult. So we've actually arranged for her to be able to go into the office and get the time that she needs to be able to get her work done. So it's difficult. I think one thing I would say, and again, it was something I was speaking about earlier this week, is, you know, what I'm finding is there's an additional burden on people managers now. And if I was to give one piece of advice to the employers listening, is is to be mindful of your people managers, because there's an extra burden on them, because now it has to be this kind of individualized plan and individualized kind of way of managing your team, where you might have been able to make a decision about one thing and roll it out across the team. It's now kind of individual discussions, trying to figure out how can we help people to still continue to maintain their productivity and to be successful in work, but at the same time having to be mindful of the competing demands of what's happening at home and things. So certainly some of the work we're doing in the centre is around equipping people managers with the tools and the information that they need to be able to kind of adapt their management style to be able to cope and kind of help navigate their team through this. One of the things, and it was a tool that we'd actually launched last year, was around, we called it the accommodations passport. Mm-hmm. Now, you're probably familiar with that term when it comes to like disability accommodations and things like that. But what we were thinking is an accommodations passport should be around a one-to-one conversation around how can we accommodate your needs and your particular needs for what's happening in your life right now. And then making sure that that's kind of built into how the team work, so that there isn't any animosity in the team either between, maybe somebody has to start a little later and maybe pick some work up in the evening, but that there's real kind of transparency. There's an informal process, you don't necessarily need HR to be involved, to have a conversation with your manager around getting your job done. And it's quite progressive, really. I don't know if you've ever heard the term, Maureen, called ROWE. It's results only work environment. It's called ROWE. And it was a concept that was adopted by Zappos, actually, with the first company in the States that ever came up with it. And it's this concept of results only work environment. So you focus on the outputs, not being present. So it moves away from this, I have to be sitting in the office for 10 hours a day, and really more into this concept of, well, what are you producing? What's your output for the organization? Yeah. So that's one thing. I think one of the things, I said two things actually, just to bring them to people's minds. One is I read some research there recently. I think it was actually one of the academics in DCU that talked about we're working on average an extra 37 hours a month. Mm-hmm. Like as humans, it is not possible for us to sustain that. Yeah. And because it's all online, our brains are it's more intense. We're looking at faces constantly. Our brains are working in different ways, and it's much more tiring, and it's much harder for us as humans to disconnect and switch off. So what I would say, particularly now as we're going into darker times, darker days, again, as people managers, just being mindful of that and try and encourage downtime. One of the things we've done in our team is we have walking team meetings. So we switch off the cameras. We're still on using the technology, but we have the meeting while we're walking. Yeah. So things we can do to introduce that. And just one final thing, and again, it was a piece of advice I gave Pippa, who works for me and my team, who, again, I mentioned 3 small kids. She was just, I think, feeling like she was failing at absolutely everything, and what I had said to her is make a list, and make a list for yourself each day. And if you fulfill your list each day, that's, you haven't failed, right? Because, and I know, Maureen, there's probably plenty of people listening are feeling like this, right? They feel like they're not doing a good job because they're not getting, to give the same attention they might have done in work when they were in the office. They're not getting the same, giving the kids the same attention, or even, people who maybe were, particularly now with the gyms closed and things like that, but people maybe don't feel like that they're given themselves and their physical self-attention. So I suppose what I'm saying is just, take it a day at a time and try and build a plan for yourself and think about how can you be fulfilled from every aspect of your life within the day, because I think it's the only way we're going to be able to kind of mind our mental health and look after ourselves to get through this.
And take care of ourselves, I think that, you make a couple of good points there. Employers, mind your people managers, because it is more intense than ever for these people, for people in those positions. And then, it's just, making sure you feel positive at the end of the day. And I think the term I use, and if my colleagues are on the phone or on the call, the control the controllables. So outline what you can control, and the rest you can do nothing about, almost leave them to the side. But I think if you control what you can control, the rest may come along. You know, it will happen. That's really interesting, Sandra, and thank you. Some really, really interesting points there and really good advice. And we do need to take care of ourselves and of each other during this time. What I might jump in, and I think, you know, we've touched on this then if we move at, I suppose you've touched on it. So there, you know, there's some people there, or there's parts of the survey for sure where they're saying it's a positive thing and now it's something they want in their life in going forward for sure. And we're seeing it within our own organisations in the last couple of months where organisations were maybe coming back into the office, maybe not, you know, flexible working wasn't on something they could offer, and people choosing to move, you know, they moved jobs or where they could to secure that. But then if we look at flexible working, I suppose, and is it working and how it's working, and like everything, there's pluses and minuses, and as you just said there. So then, sorry, the word, apologies, technology, that is not correct, excuse me. Oh, here. So if we go to the next slide there, Phil. Yes, thank you. So I just found interesting your thoughts on this. So we looked at prior to the pandemic and then post. So prior to the pandemic, 24% of those who worked flexibly felt disadvantaged. And this has actually fallen to 16%, which is a positive. So we're moving in the right direction. What are your thoughts on this, Sandra? You know, why might an individual feel less disadvantaged now?
Well, probably because we're all in the same boat. I think one of the things, I suppose, that people may have felt, you know, if they were in a minority, as in, you know, there may be only, you know, one or two or three people working flexibly, or maybe, you know, and I think what was happening is because we didn't have the right structures in place in our organisations, that quite often people could have been excluded from meetings or excluded from things, decision making and things like that, or even perception from the colleagues. You know, like I've heard people talk about their comments of, you know, they're walking out the door and there's, you know, people saying to them, half day again and things like that, you know, where I think we have no choice now other than to shift away from that. One of the things we do talk to when we're talking to leaders, in particular leadership teams, and in particular managers, we're saying to them, you know, pay attention to who's not in the room, you know. So at the same time now, while you're inviting people into the room and you're making critical decisions around the business, pay attention to who's not in the room, you know, and that's really important. And particular, another thing I would say is, again, another burden on managers, right, is, you know, those critical career conversations need to continue. They need to be more deliberate. Development conversations need to continue. Like, they're all the things that potentially could fall to the wayside, right, as we just try and keep the business ticking over, you know. But for humans, right, and for us to feel fulfilled in work, we need to feel connected. And I know we can't be physically in the same environment, but we can certainly still be connected to the work and be connected to our careers. So again, I think it's about equipping the people managers and encouraging them to kind of keep those career conversations going. And for senior leadership teams, absolutely, if you're making decisions about people that are impacting people, please make sure that their voice is in the room and that you've really kind of considered things from the other perspectives before decisions are made.
Yeah, and that's key to diversity, you know, and that's the decision and the innovative thinking and challenging our own groupthink, as you said. I think it's interesting what you said now is we're all equal, you know, we're all in the same situation. And it brings me to another report by mine that we've done previously, particularly around parental leave and from a male perspective in particular, and requesting flexible working, but they didn't want to do it because of the perception of their seriousness, how serious they were taking their career if they were requesting or, you know, reduced hours or flexible working or taking parental leave. So it's very interesting, yeah. Then just, I suppose we've touched on this, and I'm not sure if you want to add a point because, you know, there is a downside, you know, while there's lots of positives to flexible working, professionals are also recognising that there's drawbacks, as you can see here. It's like 50% site employee isolation, 49% blurring of lines between home and work, 31% saying difficulty communicating with colleagues. So I know you've touched on it a little bit, but I don't know if there's anything else you want to add there to that, or do you think you've covered it?
I suppose only one thing I would say, because, and again, it's something, Maureen, that came up at that global aviation conference that I mentioned. One of the questions that came in from the audience was around, you know, the graduate recruitment programs and the kind of early stage career young people who potentially don't, you know, they're not as fortunate as some of the rest of us, where we have kind of offices that and places that are comfortable that we can work from home in, and how can we support them, you know, because, you know, we're probably not going to be able to support them in getting better accommodation or things like that. But it was really just, they were looking for practical advice around how can we support them in two ways. One, around kind of connection. So how can we make sure when we're bringing new people, in particular young people, into our organisation, how can we make sure that we encourage them and support them in kind of building connections with others in the organisation? And then the second thing then is around how can we kind of help them with that challenge around the kind of physical environment, you know, and so the first thing I would say, one of the things I have mentioned, and I have now committed to a piece of work, and we will deliver this through the Centre of Excellence, is to do a paper on some of the ways where the creative ways we're connecting young people in higher education. And one of the things we're doing in DCU, for example, is, you know, at the heads and deans, we've come up with this concept around micro communities. So how can we help, you know, because if you're in a class of 200, it's unlikely you're going to actually be able to, you know, form any kind of meaningful connections. Where if we can, you know, work on this concept of micro communities and, you know, focus on the work or focus on projects, it helps people connect. So we know it's not ideal, it's virtual, but just being mindful. So what we've agreed to do is put together a paper just on to help document some of the good ideas that we're seeing to kind of help employers continue the good work around supporting young people with their careers. The second thing then, what was the second thing I said to you there, Maureen? I made 2 points.
Physical connection.
Oh yeah, the physical environment. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. So there is. I know at National Diversity and Inclusion Day, one of our academics had mentioned about a company in Ireland that has created this concept of co-working space. You know, so and I say that, like, if I think about Talent Garden, for example, in Dublin, it's on the DCU campus. Like that's a co-working space that has people from all different companies. Now, granted, it's mainly entrepreneurs, but like if you think if you were to go to a local town in Ireland that potentially had a space where you might have, you know, 10 people from different organisations, but they're coming to meet up, they might have a coffee, you know, and that they're, you know, it's not necessarily meeting up. They might be meeting with their colleagues, but they might also be meeting them with others. So I think I think that this is probably going to be here for probably another year anyway, right? I do think we need to start thinking about creative ways to help people who potentially have challenges around the environment that they're working in.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. It is very, I think we're going to be here for a while, so we need to really address it. It needs to very much get on the agenda. And I think in that environment, again, it's back to diversity, isn't it? Because you're having different conversations with different people from different businesses. I know one situation now in the UK, a group of interns, they started with the organisation. So it was in the UK, but the base was meant to be London, but they started working remotely. But the group of interns got together and they became friendly over this environment. And they decided to create a hub, and the 6 of them moved to London, and they're working in a flat or a house, but they're working together, and they've created now their micro community, working for the same organisation. I'm sure the culture, etc. So that was really interesting, and how innovative people can be, and how that would work for them, and they're still getting the experiences. Very good. So this is the final point then. So just to look at backgrounds and people's backgrounds, and this came through in the report. You know, we look at it every year, and I suppose despite the well-documented advantages again of the strong and active D&I policy, the role in attracting and retaining diverse talent, you know, that empowers an organisation at so many levels. It still seems that we have a way to go. 44% of professionals believe their chances of being selected for a job have been limited because of their background or an identifying factor. And unfortunately, it's the same number as last year. So are we making any progress here at all, Sandra?
I wish I could say we are, probably not. And I think any progress is minuscule. It's really not. I think what I have seen, and certainly with the work we're doing in the centre, and since the murder of George Floyd, and there really has been a shift, I think, in people's consciousness now around race and racism, and in particular bias in hiring. And thankfully, what I'm seeing is that something that has been described by minorities to us as the elephant in the room. Okay, race, it never gets spoken about. That we've had stories of people talking to us in our race equality forum, telling us stories that they feel like that in Ireland the big focus is on gender and there's never any kind of discussion around anything beyond that. And that's very disheartening if you're in an organisation. One stat I think I always talk about around this is, and it's something to be mindful of, if we think of the 30% club and the whole concept of why the 30% club was established, like that was based on research that showed that if you are any less than 30% of the kind of majority in the room, that it's very difficult for you to have a voice, and it's very difficult for you to break through the group think. Mm-hmm. So you think about this in our organisations. If you're a minority, like probably a lot of us have experienced that as being less than 30% of female. But you can imagine what that's like if English is not your first language, for example. Yeah. You can imagine what it's like maybe if you don't have the right accent or you're not from the right side of the city. If we think about what discrimination looks like for us in Ireland, generally it is around accent would probably be one of the first things. So we know what it's like for minorities, when we have our own kind of discrimination going on in Ireland. And I think, Maureen, that's probably what's coming up in your research there. Even we've heard stories around people, thinking that they might have been excluded from jobs and CV sifting because they've moved into Ballymun, for example. So they've wrong address. They're not from there. Not that would make any difference at all. But they feel that that's something that they've been removed from the selection process. Yeah. I think one of the things I would say is, there's clearly bias in hiring. I think some of it's conscious and some of it's unconscious. What I would say to employers is, it's a complex, race is complex. It's much more complex than any other aspect of diversity and inclusion, because it is around the deconstruction of systemic racism and the systems that we have all been indoctrinated into. What I would say is, if you are interested in finding out more about it, connect with us in the Centre of Excellence. So one of the things we're doing, we have established a race equality hub. Like, we had a lot of people coming to us, employers and individuals, who were deeply affected by the murder of George Floyd. And what we have done to try and help organisations is bring them closer to the academic research and the expertise in this area. So tapping into our network, for example, there's Dr. Evan Joseph has just launched a course in Black Studies, where she's helping people get a sense of, starting to identify this structured racism. And it's not just in Ireland, this is across the globe. I suppose it's what I'm finding, and I'll leave it, I suppose, on this point, is it's specialist work. Yeah. I certainly, as a white person, felt deeply uncomfortable, right? As people coming to me as a white person, asking me to talk about race and to be the voice, and I'm refusing to do that, right? So what I am is an advocate and an ally, and I'm on the same learning journey as every other white person as we try and figure this out. But what I'm doing as much as I possibly can is creating space for minority voices and creating an opportunity, and using my privilege to raise the voices so that people can tell their story. One of the things we have established, I have mentioned there about the Race Equality Forum, that was a confidential kind of private forum where people were able to tell us the stories. Some of the things they were saying was, changing their names on CVs, that's absolutely disgraceful that people have to do that. So what we've done anyway, long story short, we've established the Race Equality Forum for employers, to hear firsthand and for you to see if you want to, you need a minority voice to come in and speak in your organisation, or you want to get some advice around your policies. It's not about coming to us, it's going to the people that you're trying to represent. And that forum has been established. It's led by Pedro Antovaro in my centre, and he's the chair of it. And they'd be happy to support employers across Ireland in any aspect or anything. Mm-hmm. Any aspect. I think one of the challenges I find around race and ethnicity is, and you've used the term BAME there, right? One of the challenges we figured in Ireland is that we need to create our own narrative and language that works for us in Ireland, because we can't just pick up terms from the UK or the US and think that they work here, because they don't, and that's the thing. So we have a real opportunity to create a narrative and to have successful integration and communities across Ireland. But unfortunately, we're a bit away from that. Okay, but I think employers and in the workforce, we have a real opportunity to kind of foster that kind of collaboration and community building. So we'd be happy to support or whatever they need support in that.
And I did speak with Pedro during the week.
Very good.
And very interested. He's got a lot of very interesting things to say, and he's very passionate about what he does. So if this is an area you should definitely pick up with Pedro and the department, it's very insightful. And I think it takes us back again, as we're saying, okay, we've gone beyond the right thing to do, the smart thing to do. But again, we need to look at our society, and society, in Ireland is made up of lots of different people from different backgrounds, and that should be there are clients, there are customers, but they're our organisation as well, and we should be reflective of that. And I think companies are very aware. It's a journey, and I think we've a lot to learn as well. If we, people changing names, or I think Pedro also spoke about understanding qualifications. Qualifications here versus elsewhere. So there's a bit of work of us as employers to understand, well, what does this qualification mean? And it could be, it might say something different, but it could be exactly what you're looking for.
Yeah, and I think, Maureen, just to add to that, we've probably all heard the quote by James Charlton. He was a disability advocate, and he said this quote around "nothing about us without us." Mm-hmm. And we've probably heard that, but it's true, and the same even if we think about all the work we've done in gender equality, or even in every aspect of equality. Nothing about us without us, right? It's not okay that people are making decisions without our voice in the room, and mm-hmm. really that's why we've established the forum. So it's not myself that's giving you the advice. It's not that. It's that you're going to speak to the real people that you're going to impact when you make your decisions. You're going to impact when you implement the policies. And I think that's really important, and that's how we'll foster collaboration, and that's how we'll get true representation in Ireland. I know I was actually on a discussion last night with Senator Curry, and she was talking about the work they're doing in the Seanad and the work they're doing in the Department of Justice around a real focus on an action plan around race. Now, I know we started the first action plan probably about 10 years ago and nothing has happened. So what they've come back now is looking at it, and they're looking for tangible actions around what can we do in society. And our work, the work we're doing in the centre and the voice of employers, we're taking that into that Department of Justice forum. And I think that's important. Look, as employers, we have a duty of care, right? And when we start to look at the stats, I think Evan Joseph's research showed that something like 48% of people of African descent in Ireland are unemployed. That's absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
And it's not from lack of trying to find a job. It's just it's this, unfortunately, discrimination in some cases.
Yeah, and the bias and the unconscious bias. Look forward to hearing more about that work, Sandra. It sounds really, really interesting, and it sounds it's critical. Yeah, really, really important. We might just move to, I'm conscious of time, and there is some questions after coming through. So just Gavin asked here, just what's the most impactful thing you've done to bring equity into the workplace? That may sound obvious, but still it's an eye-opening potentially for other people. So
What's the most impactful thing I've done, is it?
Yeah, that you think, even I suppose we or as organisations could do to bring equity into the workplace.
Yeah, I think, I always say to organisations, right, around diversity and inclusion is an individual and a very personal thing for each organisation, because no two cultures are the same. And it's not possible to pick up a diversity and inclusion strategy from one organisation and think you're going to apply it to the other, because it doesn't work like that. So what I would say is, and it's a difficult question to answer because it depends on what stage you're at of your diversity and inclusion journey. But what I would say, and I always encourage organisations, is make sure that there is a grassroots element to the work you're doing. And what I mean by that is that you have that representation of voices. And Maureen, it's exactly what's coming out here. Okay, it's who are you representing, and who is being misrepresented when decisions are being made around the table. So what I would say is the most impactful, and even if I think about, if I was to answer that question from a personal perspective, like I spent 20 years in the telecoms industry, working across the UK and Ireland. I only got an opportunity to focus on diversity and inclusion in a voluntary capacity. And I was absolutely delighted, and I relish my role where I get to live and breathe diversity and inclusion in a university 24/7. And I use that privilege position to be able to advance diversity and inclusion as much as I possibly can. And what I'm trying to do is to create space for minority voices, create space for people who haven't been heard or maybe, don't get the opportunity. So that's what I'm doing. But what I would say is, taking that into an organisation, what would that look like? If you don't already have a diversity and inclusion committee or an action group or whatever it is you want to call it, just make sure you have the people around the table that you want to represent.
Yeah, very good. And there's a question that's come in from Michelle, and along the lines of the previous one, but do you have any practical action steps to start the process of ensuring we're actively being inclusive?
Yeah, well, and I think I'll take you back to Inclusio. Okay, so when I was in industry, so I would have been involved in D&I for probably about 12, maybe 13 years before I came into DCU. Back in the day, before it was called diversity and inclusion. And one of the things I realised increasingly, so my background is in sales and operations, and KPIs are what's required. And I came into the university with an idea in my head to solve one of the biggest problems that I experienced around D&I, and that is, how do you measure impact and return on investment around culture and diversity and inclusion? So over the last 3 years now, we were funded by Enterprise Ireland, and over the last 3 years, we have built a software tool. I don't think we could have built it in any other environment. It has been built within the ecosystem of the university, and the best brains, as you can imagine, we put them to good work. And to answer your question, where do you start? You start with the data, because if you don't have data and you don't have your line in the sand and know exactly what the problem is you're trying to solve, it'll run out of steam, and you'll struggle to be heard at the top table. You'll struggle to be able to get people to engage in it, because it'll be seen as you're not taking it seriously. So I was only speaking to an organisation yesterday around this very thing, and what I had said to them is, in some ways it's kind of good that you're only starting now, because you have the benefit of being able to accelerate it by looking at what has worked in other organisations. And then obviously working with Inclusio then to create that kind of line in the sand and the benchmark. But that's the starting point, data. For me, it has to be evidence-based, and if it isn't, it'll run out of steam.
Yeah, excellent. Fantastic. I'm going to leave it at that. There are some other questions, and Sandra, I might share them with you, and if you had a moment to just write some notes and we can reply and send them back to the individuals that did ask them. But thank you so much, Sandra, for your time this morning. It's been really insightful what you said and what you shared, and I think there's a lot of practical steps that people can take away immediately and bring it in. But I think the work that you're doing, we're very fortunate to have you, Sandra, here in Ireland. The work that you're doing in the Centre of Excellence, I think, not alone for organisations, because we can all benefit, but for society in a whole, what you're doing is going to be hugely impactful. So thank you very much for your time, Sandra. Thank you, everybody, for joining us here this morning. If you haven't got a copy of the report already, feel free to request the link there, and we'll make sure to get it to you. Have a great afternoon, a great day, take care and be safe.
Thank you, Maureen.
Thanks, Andrew.